Today, we are looking at a particularly delicious bit of history. If you've ever had a chocolate chip cookie or a Frappuccino or used teaspoons and cups as part of a recipe, then you have been part of the food revolution that started here in Massachusetts. Did you know that the history of chocolate in Massachusetts goes back before the revolution? In the early 1700s, Bostonians drank hot chocolate in early versions of coffee shops. And in 1765, an Irish immigrant named John Hannon and an American doctor named James Baker set up the first chocolate mill in the American colonies in Dorchester, Boston. Using imported cocoa beans, they produced chocolate for both drinking and baking, laying the foundation for what would eventually be the Walter Baker Chocolate Company. Walter Baker was the grandson of the co-founder, and when he took over the company, he started making chocolate that was specifically intended for baking. And that marked the introduction of what we now call Baker's chocolate. It's chocolate with a high cocoa content, but low sugar content. Today, Baker's chocolate is actually owned by Kraft Heinz, but it is the standard for baking in recipes. In 1847, a company that would eventually become Necco, the New England Confectionery Company, began making candy in Boston. Their signature Necco wafers were a wartime staple, and sweethearts became America's favorite way to say, "Be mine." Necco's factory complex in Cambridge was once claimed to be the largest candy manufacturing plant in the world when it opened in 1927. It's now a research lab for the Swiss biopharma company, Novartis. Cambridge's candy industry expanded when James O. Welch launched his sugar empire in Cambridge, making favorites like Junior Mints, Sugar Babies, and Sugar Daddies, all born right here and still made in the city's last surviving candy factory. To this day, confectioners like Jeremy Spindler are carrying on the sweet tradition of candy making right here in Cambridge. Why was there so much candy entrepreneurship and innovation in Cambridge?
So going way back, 1630, when the Puritans land in the area, they came over from Britain with a bit of a sweet tooth. So right from the beginning, there was a bit of a demand for sugar and chocolate. At that time, it would have been drinking chocolate. They didn't really have candy bars or anything like that yet. Fast forward about 100 years, 1765, the very first chocolate manufacturer, arguably on the continent of North America, opened up down in Dorchester. Fast forward a little bit more, 1834, Boston gets a sugar refinery. 1860, we get a second sugar refinery. So right there by the 1860s, we have chocolate being produced and sugar being produced in the area, which are two of the major ingredients in all chocolate and candies. Yeah, Boston was a really major port city. There were tons of goods coming in from the Caribbean, from Europe. So all of the ingredients that you need, fruits, nuts, sugars, chocolate, everything coming right into the city. Then we get to 1847. And a gentleman named Oliver Chase. He was a druggist or a pharmacist, and he invented that little machine to churn out little lozenges or little wafers. They were about a quarter size. They would eventually become known as Necco wafers. And that machine is reputed to be the first piece of machinery ever invented for the purpose of making candy. You could churn out probably thousands of these in an hour with this little machine and just really sped up the process. So gradually, more and more companies start popping up in Boston. A lot of them eventually move over to Cambridge because the real estate was cheaper. And by the time we get to the 1920s, there are about 140 factories all producing chocolate and candy throughout the Boston area. 42 of them were in Cambridge, largely along Main Street, along 1 3/4 mile stretch. And that's where that neighborhood got the name Confectioners Row. So you can imagine walking down the street, just factory after factory after factory producing chocolate and candy.
In the mid-1800s, Harvard-educated chemist Eben Norton Horsford revolutionized baking from his laboratory in Cambridge. By replacing unstable original leavening agents with a more reliable mixture of acid phosphate and sodium bicarbonate, he invented Rumford baking powder, named after his mentor, Count Rumford. The new leavening agent allowed for faster and more consistent baking without yeast and changed home baking forever. You can still find Rumford baking powder on supermarket shelves today. Boston's Parker House Hotel created two culinary icons in the mid-1800s. The Boston cream pie, which is actually a yellow cake layered with custard and then drizzled with chocolate, and Parker House rolls, buttery, folded, and served across America ever since.
The Parker House was opened October 8th, 1855 by Harvey D. Parker. He wanted to attract people from around the state, around the country, and around the world. He decided he wanted to have the best of everything. The finest food, the best chefs, the best accommodations, the safest place. It set a precedent. He also did something very creative in the culinary line. Most American hotels operated on what was called the American plan. You showed up in the dining area at X time. There might be long tables. They had the food put out there, you ate it at that time with the other people and ate what was there. The European plan was a la carte. You could order any time during the day. You had menus where you could choose this and this. It was specially made for you, which was enticing to really high quality chefs. France was very popular here in the 19th century. Everyone knew that French cooking was the best in the world. So Harvey got himself a French chef, a guy named Augustin François Anezin. When Harvey hired him in 1865, he was one of the most prestigious chefs in the United States. While he was here, the rolls began, the Boston cream pie began, just amazing food that nobody else had. And of course, everybody else wanted to get their own French chef after that. The average cook in a Boston hotel or restaurant was getting paid $8 a week. He offered Anezin $5,000 a year. You can do the math. The mayor of Boston at that same time was paid $5,000 a year. That's how you get the best chefs. Very early on, in fact, just a couple of months after opening in October of 1855, Harvey attracted a very prestigious personnel. Longfellow, Emerson, Whittier, Hawthorne, Holmes, Louis Agassiz, Charles Sumner, just a whole bunch of people, many literary, some other fields as well. And they decided that they wanted to have a festive club here. They came to be called the Saturday Club. So the last Saturday of every month, starting in 1855, they met here at 3 in the afternoon. They would drink, they would read things they were working on, they would eat, they would drink, and they would drink. Now, I don't want to overemphasize that it was all literary and intellectual, because they had a really good time. This attracted lots of people. If you see that these people are here, you want to be here. It's one of the reasons that a dozen years later, when Dickens was coming to town to do a reading tour, he said, I'm going to stay at the Parker House, okay? It's near the Old Corner Bookstore, my favorite publisher. It has all these great things. I love Longfellow. I want to be here. So success breeds success.
In the late 1800s, long before nutrition science was even considered a thing, Ellen Swallow Richards was pioneering it right here in Massachusetts. She was the first woman admitted to MIT, the first female instructor on the faculty, and the first person in America to apply chemistry to the study of food, air, and water in everyday life. In 1894, she helped to launch the first school lunch program in the United States, here in Boston, making sure that children had hot, healthy meals regardless of their income. She also published influential guides on food safety and nutrition. Richards also coined and helped popularize the term ecology and advocated for clean air and water before most people saw these as public health issues. And if you've ever followed a recipe with teaspoons and tablespoons, you can thank Fannie Farmer. She standardized American cooking measurements in 1896 with her cookbook called the Boston Cooking School Cookbook, which taught science-based, reliable home cooking. She later opened her own school, Miss Farmer's School of Cookery, where she taught students how to cook not just tasty food, but nutritious and healthy meals for hospital patients and diabetics. Joseph Lee, a Black hotel owner and inventor working in the Boston area, patented not one, but 2 machines that transformed baking in 1890. One for kneading dough, and another for turning stale bread into breadcrumbs. Lee's inventions were so successful that hotels across the US began adopting his machines, even though few people knew the man behind them. In the 1920s, a young scientist named Clarence Birdseye, who was living in Gloucester, Massachusetts, cracked the code for frozen food. Inspired by Inuit fishermen in Labrador who could flash freeze their food in the Arctic air, Birdseye developed a flash freezing method to lock in flavor and texture in foods. When Birdseye introduced its first line of frozen foods in 1930, the offerings included 24 different foods like peas, spinach, strawberries, chicken, and steak. In 1952, they introduced frozen fish sticks. These days, about 400 billion in frozen food sold around the world every year. And frozen orange juice concentrate? We developed that here too, using vacuum evaporation, a new technique that the National Research Corporation in Cambridge perfected in the 40s. with help from the US government and the Florida Citrus Commission. The goal was to get nutrition to soldiers during World War II, but after the war, the technology they developed led to the launch of Minute Maid, bringing fresh-tasting orange juice to American freezers. In 1938, Ruth Wakefield was baking at her Whitman, Massachusetts inn and ran out of baker's chocolate. She chopped up a Nestle chocolate bar instead, hoping that it would melt into the batter, and it totally didn't. The chocolate chip cookie was born. It became so popular that she sold it to Nestle in exchange for a lifetime supply of chocolate. Wakefield was a dietitian and food lecturer, and her original Toll House Inn was a favorite stop for travelers between Boston and Cape Cod. Unfortunately, it burned down on New Year's Eve in 1984, but thankfully, the cookie is forever immortal. If you've ever microwaved some leftovers, you can thank Percy Spencer. While building radar equipment for Raytheon, he noticed that a chocolate bar in his pocket had melted. That led to a wild idea: using microwaves to cook your food. The first ever microwave oven was introduced in 1946. It was called the Radar Range, and it was almost 6 feet tall and weighed 750 pounds, and cost about $5,000. It was mostly used in restaurants, cafeterias on military bases, and in the galleys of ships. Pretty much anywhere that food needed to be cooked super fast.
您好, 您好. That means, how are you? 我真高兴我们能够又在一起. That means I'm very happy we can get together again.
When Joyce Chen opened her first restaurant in Cambridge in 1958, most Americans were totally unfamiliar with authentic Chinese food. Her mission? To introduce Northern Chinese cuisine to American audiences. She coined the term Peking ravioli for dumplings, brought soy sauce to supermarket shelves, and hosted a national PBS show filmed at WGBH. Just like her friend Julia Child. Chen had to invent her own Chinese cooking tools for the American kitchen, including a flat bottom wok that worked better on US stoves. Julia Child's kitchen was right here in Cambridge too. Starting in 1963, she taught Americans how to roast a chicken, make souffle, and embrace butter, all on her show, The French Chef. She made cooking joyful, theatrical, and fearless. She also created food television as we know it today. Julia's husband, Paul, built her kitchen counters a few inches higher to suit her frame because she was, get this, 6'2". And that same kitchen now lives in the Smithsonian. The American craft beer movement began in 1984 when Jim Koch brewed his first ever batch of Samuel Adams Boston Lager right in his kitchen. He believed that American beer could be bold again and helped to spark an industry that now includes over 9,000 breweries nationwide. Koch used his great-great-grandfather's 19th century recipe to make that first batch of lager. Why did he name the company after Sam Adams? Let's ask him.
Taverns were the beginnings of the revolution, where people met, where they exchanged news. It's where Samuel Adams plotted with the Sons of Liberty and the committees of correspondence to fan the flames of revolution. Sam Adams basically fueled the American beer revolution one glass at a time. I started in my kitchen here in Boston. Nobody knew about craft beer. The term hadn't even been invented. I literally had to go from bar to bar selling my beer. I had cold beer in my briefcase, and we created and fueled this revolution, putting great beer in people's hands. I never thought Sam Adams would become what it became. I thought, maybe someday we'll be really successful and we'll be able to sell Sam Adams in Worcester. We as humans evolved to enjoy things that are sweeter, fruitier, maybe more balanced. So a fourth category of alcoholic beverages that is not traditional beer, not traditional wine, not traditional liquor. Sort of amazing, but this little company in Boston has pioneered categories that today represent almost 30% of the whole business. There are some wonderful alcoholic beverages and beers that haven't been made yet. And I want to be the company that makes those.
Back in 1975, the first specialty coffee roaster in the country, Coffee Connection, was founded, leading to a revolution in the coffee world. Who better to tell that story than founder and coffee legend George Howell?
One thing that I always wanted to be is truthful and totally straightforward about what it was that we were selling. So we decided we had to roast coffee, the only way we could control the quality. We literally purchased a coffee machine out of Germany, brought it to the States, and started roasting, not knowing what we were doing. And the question is, how do I explain to people that we're actually roasters, that we're roasting the coffee? Put a roast date down on every barrel that we were scooping coffee from, on the bag as well. This was 1975, and nobody would be doing it for another 2 decades. Everybody in the business was telling me, you're going to go bankrupt in a matter of weeks. So we opened up in Harvard Square in the garage, a really small section, and we are an overnight success. The Frappuccino was not invented by me or anyone else. The concept was originally an iced cappuccino, and it was being talked about years before Frappuccino ever came into existence. It's the reality. Sugar, coffee, milk. Granita machine, wow. That was it. Fraps, what's big in New England, Frappuccino, and we all went, oh my God. For us, what it did was it made our summer sales equal to any other season that we had, whereas the summer was always a dip in our sales. Not anymore. A good coffee can be like a really good wine, kind of one note, but delicious, and a great coffee can go altering, just like a the finest wine, right? And you just don't know in 10 minutes what it's going to fully taste like. What drives me is the need to share, being together, and really being amazed by the unexpected.
One more stop for a cold drink and a toast to one more Massachusetts innovator. In the early 1800s, Boston merchant Frederick Tudor had a totally radical idea. Take ice from frozen New England ponds and ship it to the tropics. It is a crazy idea. This wharf in Boston Harbor is called Tudor Wharf because it is where he loaded the ice up onto ships. And people thought he was totally nuts. And at one point, he did rack up enough debt to end up in a debtor's prison, but he did eventually succeed with his idea. Tudor figured out how to insulate ice in sawdust, store it year-round in ice houses, and send it to places like Cuba, India, and the American South, creating the world's first cold chain before refrigeration. Historians talk about Tudor's regular ice deliveries as one of the things that helped to spark cocktail culture in New Orleans in the 19th century. Doctors also used the ice to treat patients with fevers and to preserve the potency of medicines. At one point, Queen Victoria was a customer, getting Tudor's ice delivered to Windsor Castle. So let's raise a glass to the Ice King, Frederick Tudor, and to all of these other food world innovators.